Interest rates are dropping. I mean, home prices are down a full 21% from their peak. By all the, traditional economic rules, we should be seeing an absolute buying frenzy in Canada right now.
Oh, absolutely. You'd expect lines out the door.
Right. But instead, the open houses are just empty, the market is stagnant, and buyers are completely paralyzed. So, today we are cutting through the noise. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are looking at the wildly contradictory signals coming out of the 2026 to 2029 Canadian housing and economic forecasts. And our mission today is to figure out why the traditional rules of real estate have, well, basically suddenly stopped working.
Because the data we are working with today, it paints a picture of a market that is fundamentally at odds with itself. It's this massive structural divergence between the cost of borrowing money and the actual behavior of the consumer.
And to really map out that divergence, we are pulling from a phenomenal stack of sources provided by Mandeep Tour and the OMAX Ear real estate team.
Yeah, they provided an incredible foundation for this.
They really did. We are specifically layering this comprehensive, multi-year housing forecast from True North Mortgage right on top of a highly granular province-by-province economic breakdown from TD Economics.
Which is really the only necessary approach right now. You just cannot look at the Canadian housing market through a single lens anymore.
No, you have to marry the micro-level mortgage data with all those macro-level realities. Global trade, energy prices, demographics, all of it.
Okay, let's unpack this because the core paradox of the current market makes absolutely no sense on paper.
It really doesn't.
By May of 2026, the national average home price sat at $667,700. Like I said, that's 21% below the peak we saw back in March of 2022.
Right, a massive discount.
Combine that with the fact that the Bank of Canada dropped the prime rate by a full 1% in 2025. I mean, you have cheaper money and cheaper houses.
And yet, that anticipated surge in demand, it just never materialized. It's crazy. It's like throwing this massive party, unlocking all the front doors, and putting up a huge welcome sign, but the guests are just too nervous about the neighborhood to actually come inside.
That's a great way to put it, actually. We are seeing a complete disconnect between the mechanics of housing affordability and the psychology of the home buyer.
So if the mortgage is cheaper, why is the buyer staying home?
Because, the mortgage rate is just one piece of a much larger household ledger. Buyers are stepping back, looking at the overall macroeconomic weather, and they're seeing storm clouds everywhere.
So it's about fear.
Total macroeconomic anxiety. You have to factor in the current U.S. trade war and the looming threat of cross-border tariffs. That creates immediate job insecurity, especially if you work in manufacturing or export sectors.
I mean, if you think your employer's profit margins are about to be completely wiped out by a U.S. tariff, you are definitely not signing a 25-year mortgage agreement.
Exactly, no matter what the Bank of Canada does with the prime rate. And then, add to that the surging energy prices driven by global geopolitical conflicts, the ongoing tensions between the U.S. and Iran, for instance.
That's causing severe spikes in oil and gas.
Huge spikes, which just drains discretionary income. Even if your monthly mortgage payment is slightly lower because of a rate cut, that savings is entirely consumed by your grocery and gas bills.
Which means the Bank of Canada's rate cuts are basically irrelevant to a financially stretched family.
Pretty much. But beyond the household budget, the sources highlight a second, much larger structural mechanism at play. The demographic data here is genuinely staggering.
Oh, the immigration numbers.
Right. For the better part of a decade, the baseline assumption for Canadian real estate was that massive, relentless immigration would provide this endless floor for housing demand.
We just assumed people would keep pouring in.
We did. But the True North and TD data completely shatter that assumption. In 2024, the country saw an outflow of over 660,000 temporary residents.
Over 500,000 people just packed up and left.
And that wasn't a blip. It continued into 2025, culminating in Canada's first ever population contraction.
Wait, the country actually shrank.
It shrank.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
that sudden, sharp contraction in population functioned as a massive release valve for the entire housing spectrum. When you suddenly remove 500,000 people from the rental market, rents stabilize or they drop.
Which totally removes the panic for first-time homebuyers.
Exactly. They aren't desperately trying to escape exorbitant rent hikes anymore. And when first-time buyers stop panic buying entry-level condos, the people trying to upgrade from a condo to a townhouse, well, they lose their leverage.
The urgency just evaporates from the bottom up.
Precisely.
So the fear of missing out has been fully replaced by the fear of buying at the wrong time.
Mm.
We've got cheaper borrowing costs clashing directly with a shrinking population and this tariff-driven job anxiety.
It's a mess.
It is. And that friction brings us to the forecasting models. Because the people whose entire job is to predict what happens next are completely fractured on how this plays out.
The divergence in institutional forecasts for the next 3 years is unprecedented.
The True North source actually calls it playing pin the tail on the house donkey.
Which is hilariously accurate.
I mean, just look at the 2026 national price predictions. RE/MAX is forecasting a 3.7% drop. The CMHC, the government's own housing agency, models a 2.6% increase.
And then you have the economists at the Bank of Montreal.
Right. BMO is projecting that prices won't even recover to their pandemic peaks until 2029. That is a nearly 6% spread in short-term national predictions.
It's a flashing red light that the underlying modeling metrics are broken.
But how does that happen? I mean, I understand that econometric models differ, but are these top-tier institutions just completely guessing?
Right.
How do you get a 6% spread when they all have access to the exact same Bank of Canada rate schedules and demographic data?
It really comes down to the mechanics of how you aggregate a market as geographically and economically vast as Canada. The core issue is that national averages are notoriously deceptive.
Because they clump everything together.
Right. A national model attempts to average the economic reality of a downtown Toronto condo with a single-family home in rural Saskatchewan. It dilutes the actual conditions of both.
Because massive markets like Toronto and Vancouver have such immense density and high valuations, right? So any local volatility there essentially hijacks the whole national average.
Exactly. If Toronto experiences a localized condo glut, the national average plummets. It drags the narrative down even if prices in Alberta are actively climbing.
That makes sense.
Plus, these institutions are weighing their variables differently. For example, some models heavily weigh the potential outcomes of the upcoming CUSMA negotiations, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement.
Right.
If a forecaster assumes heavy tariffs are coming, they model higher unemployment and dropping home prices. If another forecaster assumes free trade continues smoothly, their model projects rising consumer confidence and higher home values.
So they're basically betting on completely different political outcomes.
Yes. Add in the discrepancy between using seasonally adjusted data versus raw data, and you end up with a fractured consensus.
So if the national average is essentially a statistical fiction skewed by two cities and trade assumptions, any buyer using that national data is flying blind.
Completely blind.
Yeah.
Which is why the TD Economics provincial data is so critical. We have to pull out the magnifying glass and abandon this concept of a single Canadian housing market.
We really do, because looking at the TD breakdown, Canada doesn't have one economy right now. It has several. It is a fierce provincial tug of war.
It really is.
Let's look at the regions experiencing a massive upswing. The data calls them the oil winners, specifically Newfoundland and Labrador and Alberta.
The contrast here is staggering. While the national narrative is all about stagnation, Newfoundland and Labrador posted an extraordinary 3.5% GDP growth last year.
Wow.
Driven directly by global geopolitical instability. The U.S.-Iran conflict severely constrained global energy supplies, raising prices. In response, Newfoundland's oil output surged by 30%.
A 30% spike is a classic, massive resource boom, and Alberta is capturing that exact same momentum. While other provinces are freezing hiring, Alberta saw job growth jump 3.6% year over year in May.
And that localized boon flows directly into their housing market. High-paying resource sector jobs drive immediate demand for housing. It isolates those provincial markets from the national stagnation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because you contrast that booming resource reality in Alberta with the profound stagnation in the trade losers, Ontario and British Columbia.
The economic headwinds in those manufacturing and export-heavy provinces are incredibly severe.
Just look at the forecast. Ontario's GDP growth in 2026 is sitting at a dismal 0.4%.
Barely growing at all.
And the TD data highlights exactly why. You have multinational corporations pulling back entirely. Honda indefinitely suspended a $15 billion EV battery plant in Ontario, explicitly citing trade and tariff anxieties.
When you are dealing with a $15 billion capital investment, certainty is the ultimate currency. If a potential U.S. administration threatens to slap a 10% tariff on Canadian goods, the profit margin for an Ontario-built EV battery exported to Michigan collapses overnight.
Capital just flees uncertainty.
Always. And that single suspension removes thousands of direct and indirect jobs from the regional economy.
But what's puzzling to me is if an economy is barely growing at 0.4% and multi-billion-dollar mega projects are being halted, the unemployment rate in Ontario should be.
Precisely. The unemployment rate is a ratio people looking for work versus available jobs. If companies in Ontario stop hiring, but simultaneously hundreds of thousands of people leave the province or age out of the workforce, the ratio stays flat.
The denominator shrinks right alongside the numerator.
Exactly. It creates this bizarre illusion of a stable job market, preventing a headline unemployment crisis, even as actual hiring has ground to a near standstill.
The economic pie is shrinking, but because there are fewer people demanding a slice, no one is sounding the alarm.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
But this massive internal migration, people fleeing the stalled economies of Ontario and BC to flock to Alberta, it brings up a massive logistical problem. The True North source highlights this staggering deficit. Canada needs 5 million additional homes by 2030.
It is an immense deficit, and the shifting populations only concentrate that demand into specific bottlenecks.
I have to challenge the logic of the construction industry here. If builders know there is guaranteed long-term demand for 5 million homes, and governments are throwing billions in incentives at the problem, why aren't shovels hitting the dirt faster?
Because the supply side is trapped in a perfect storm of logistical, financial, and political roadblocks. First, look at the supply chain. The same energy spikes driving Alberta's boom make running heavy construction machinery vastly more expensive.
Right.
The same U.S. tariffs threatening Ontario's auto sector also apply to raw building materials, driving up the cost of imported steel.
Plus, you have a severe labor shortage in the skilled trades.
Or absolutely. Workers are retiring faster than new apprentices can replace them. So the cost to actually frame and pour a foundation is fundamentally much higher than it was 5 years ago.
Okay, those logistical hurdles make sense, but what about the political side?
Well, the most intractable roadblock is entirely political and self-inflicted. Intense local enemy-deism.
Not in my backyard. The Calgary example in the data perfectly illustrates this. It's highly ironic. Calgary's booming. They desperately need density. So the city council passes this progressive blanket rezoning law to allow missing middle housing.
2 to 8 plexes in established neighborhoods. It is the exact densification strategy urban planners have championed for a decade.
Right. A mathematically sound solution to utilize existing infrastructure. But the moment it passed, local homeowners launched this massive organized revolt.
The political backlash was intense.
So intense, the city council actually reversed course and quickly repealed the missing middle legislation. And the ultimate consequence, by repealing that zoning law, Calgary now threatens its own access to the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund.
Because that fund requires zoning reform as a condition for the infrastructure money. It perfectly captures the friction. Everyone agrees in principle that the country needs 5 million new homes. But at the municipal level, nobody wants those homes built on their specific street.
So if traditional construction is too expensive and local missing middle densification is politically toxic, how do we actually bypass this?
The data points heavily toward prefabricated and modular housing. The core logic is to industrialize the home building process. Construct the structural components indoors on a factory assembly line.
Which completely bypasses weather delays.
And labor delays. You centralize your labor force, which drastically mitigates the skilled trades shortage because workers commute to a single facility.
It's the obvious solution, so why isn't it everywhere?
Because currently, city zoning bylaws bottleneck their adoption. Most municipalities just do not have the regulatory frameworks designed to permit or inspect factory-built housing at scale. The whole inspection process assumes a stick-built home.
So the technology is ready, but the bureaucracy is holding it back.
Trapped in regulatory purgatory.
Okay, so we have macroeconomic fears stalling the buyers, local politics stalling the builders, and archaic bylaws stalling the modular solutions.
It's a lot to take in.
So what does this all mean? If you are listening to this deep dive right now, and you are trying to make the incredibly stressful decision of whether to buy, sell, or just wait with your cash, what should you take away from all this?
The most critical takeaway from the True North data is that right now, nationally, we're in a perfectly balanced market.
Which we measure using the sales to new listing ratio, the SNLR. In May of 2026, it tightened to 49.2%.
Right. And the accepted sweet spot for balance is anywhere between 45 and 65%. So at 49.2, neither buyers nor sellers have extreme leverage.
It forces rational behavior. You can actually attach conditions to offers again.
Exactly. But as we established, anyone making a decision based on the national average is missing the reality. You have to look at the extremes.
Greater Vancouver averages $1.1 million, while Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario sits at an underdog price of $310,500.
The geographic arbitrage is immense right now.
And we also have to remember the long game. Despite current dips, the True North modeling shows Canadian home prices have risen 184% since 2005.
The long-term equity growth is undeniable. But this raises an important question regarding affordability right now. According to National Bank statistics from the first quarter of 2026, mortgage affordability is actually improving across 5 of the 10 major Canadian centers.
Wait, improving? It certainly doesn't feel like it.
I know it's deeply counterintuitive, but the math works because home prices are relatively flat, while median household incomes have slowly continued to climb.
So mathematically, affordability improves. But psychologically, after the trauma of the 2022 bidding wars and aggressive inflation on groceries, buyers are just exhausted.
The spreadsheet says it's easier, but the human being doesn't feel it yet.
Well, we have charted an incredible journey today, from the 1% prime rate drop and the exodus of 660,000 temporary residents, all the way to the booming oil rigs of Newfoundland and the repealed zoning laws of Calgary.
Been a massive amount of interlocking data.
Absolutely, and huge thanks to a Mandeep Tour and the Omaxi real estate team for providing such an incredible roadmap. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Something to explore on your own that builds on everything we've discussed today.
I'm intrigued.
The sources focus heavily on how changing populations, tariffs, and energy prices shift housing markets. But as we look toward 2029, consider the impact of extreme weather and climate change on these polarized provinces.
So that's a massive variable.
Right. Could the next massive shift in Canadian real estate be driven not by interest rates or CUSMA negotiations, but by climate livability and skyrocketing property insurance premiums?
When climate risk fully prices itself into the insurance algorithms, it will redraw the map entirely.
Exactly. What happens to affordability when the cost to simply insure your home triples? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the consensus, and we will see you